Hello everyone. Tonight on Real Horror Stories, I would like to invite you to a horror story titled The Strange Photos. I would like to invite you to listen. The morning started out as any other. I woke to the soft hum of my alarm clock, the gentle rays of the sun spilling through the curtains, and the faint sound of birds chirping outside my window. But as I reached over to check my phone, something was different. There was a message only I hadn't been expecting. The photo was strange. It showed me standing outside my front door, looking through the window, as if I were watching someone inside the house. But the oddest thing, Vasi didn't remember taking that photo. I hadn't been standing there. I hadn't opened the door, and I certainly hadn't been out there at that time. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickly checked my front porch, expecting to find a camera or some other explanation. But nothing. There was no sign of anyone or anything unusual. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just a weird coincidence, perhaps even a prank. But the feeling lingered. Later that afternoon, I received another message, another photo. This time, I was sitting in my living room, reading a book, but the image was taken at a strange angle, from the shadows outside the window. It felt wrong. The photo captured me in a private moment, a moment that no one should have been able to see. I quickly checked my house again, all the windows locked and sealed tight. My phone didn't show any signs of photos being taken. No one had been in my house, at least not physically. But how was this happening? The third photo arrived just after dark. This one was different. It wasn't of me, it was of someone standing just outside my window. The figure was blurry, but I could make out the outline of a person, their face obscured by darkness. The message that accompanied the photo was simple, yet unsettling. I see you. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to find out who was sending these photos, and more importantly, how they had been taken. But as I scrolled through the photos again, one detail caught my eye. The first photo, the one of me standing outside my door, the door had been unlocked. I always locked it at night. Had it been open? The third photo arrived just after dark, when the world outside had already settled into its quiet rhythm. The house was dimly lit, only the soft glow of the living room lamp casting long shadows across the room. I was curled up on the couch, my legs tucked beneath me as I mindlessly scrolled through my phone, the quiet hum of the evening providing a sense of normalcy. Then, the phone buzzed. Another message, another photo. I stared at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. This photo was different from the others. It wasn't of me, or at least not directly. It showed the front door of my house, clearly visible through the window, but there was something unsettling about it. The door was open just slightly ajar, and the shadows in the hallway beyond seemed deeper, darker than they should have been. I froze. The door was never left open. I always made sure to lock it before going to bed. The photo made it look like someone had just come in. But the worst part, there was no sign of anyone, no person, no shadow, nothing in the hallway except the thick, inky darkness that seemed to stretch unnaturally. How could this be? My fingers trembled as I typed out a quick reply, desperate to reach whoever was behind this. Who is this? What do you want? But the reply came only seconds later, with another image attached. It was another picture of the house, but this time, it was taken from the inside. The angle suggested someone had been standing in my living room, facing the window. The faint outline of a figure was barely visible behind the curtain, just enough to be discernible if you looked closely. I stared at the image, my breath catching in my throat. Someone had been inside. How long had they been watching me? Had they been there while I was sitting on the couch just moments ago? I didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. I jumped when I heard a sound of faint creak from somewhere in the house. I quickly looked around, but there was nothing unusual. The house was as quiet as ever, but the feeling of being watched was now overwhelming. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt an icy chill settle over me. My pulse quickened, and I grabbed my phone, deciding to call the police. But just as I was about to dial, my phone buzzed again. Another message, another photo. I hesitated, but my curiosity, or perhaps my fear, drove me to open it. This one was different than this one showed me. The picture was a close-up of my face, my eyes wide in what appeared to be terror. Though I hadn't taken it, the angle was impossible. It had been taken from behind, as if someone was standing just inches away from me, watching me without me knowing. I felt a surge of panic. Who was this person? How were they in my house without me noticing? Suddenly, the quiet of the house felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on me, the darkness outside pressing against the windows, and the air was thick with a sense of dread that seemed to pulse with every passing second. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave. I grabbed my jacket and dashed for the door, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my keys. I had to get out of the house, to go somewhere, anywhere that wasn't here. But as I reached for the handle, I froze. The door was locked. I had locked it earlier. I always locked it. But now, the door seemed to resist, as if something or someone was holding it closed from the other side. I tried to turn the knob again, harder this time, but it wouldn't budge. Panic flooded my chest, and I backed away from the door, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. There was only one other way out the back door. I turned, almost running toward it, my footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. As I approached the door, I felt a sharp, icy gust of wind wash over me. The back door was slightly open. I hadn't left it open. In the dim light, I could see the outline of something dark, a shadow just beyond the door frame, moving as if waiting for me. The figure was tall, their face hidden in the darkness, but I could feel their presence like a weight pressing down on me. My heart pounded, and every instinct told me to run, to leave. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, my body locked in place by fear. And then the figure moved, slowly, deliberately. They stepped into the light, and I saw them just a silhouette, a shape that shouldn't have been there. They had been watching me all along. I stumbled backward, barely able to breathe. My mind raced for an explanation, but there was none. The figure took another step forward, and I felt a coldness settle over me. A deep, a natural chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I didn't know how long I stood there, unable to move, unable to speak. The only sound was the soft rustling of the wind outside, the faint creak of the old wood beneath my feet, and the pounding of my own heart. And then, suddenly, the figure was gone. Just like that wished. There was no sound, no movement, just an eerie emptiness where they had been. I blinked, trying to process what had just happened, but my mind refused to make sense of it. Had I imagined it? Was it all in my head? But as I turned to look around the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The photo on my phone had changed. The figure was in the photo now, standing behind me, just like they had been in the room, and they were smiling. I stumbled backward, my knees weak, and the phone slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor. It was real. The phone lay on the floor, screen cracked, but still displaying the chilling photo of the figure standing behind me. My legs felt like jelly, and I could barely keep myself upright. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls growing tighter, the shadows deeper. I didn't know what was worse, the figure in the photo or the fact that it had been so close to me. So close that I hadn't even noticed. I stumbled toward the phone, trembling as I picked it up. The figure's smile was still there, wide and unsettling. The image was distorted now, the edges blurred, as if the photo had been taken in a rush, in the midst of something that wasn't meant to be seen. The phone buzzed in my hand, and I jumped, startled. I didn't know if I could bear to open it, but I couldn't stop myself. I tapped the message. Another photo, this time It wasn't of me. It wasn't of my house either. It was a photo of my street again from across the road, right in front of my house. Looking directly at my front window, the only light visible was the glow from my living room lamp, casting an eerie yellow light in the otherwise dark street. But what caught my attention was something I hadn't noticed before: the shadow of someone standing at the corner, hidden just out of sight, but there, watching. My stomach churned, and I quickly checked the time. It was already past midnight. I glanced nervously toward the front window, but there was nothing. The street outside was empty, silent, as if no one had been there at all. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I had to leave. I couldn't stay in this house another minute, not with a sense of impending dread crawling up my spine. I grabbed my jacket again, ready to bolt for the door. But then I heard a soft tapping at the window. It was faint at first, barely audible over the thudding of my heart, but it grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. My blood ran cold. I approached the window cautiously, my feet heavy, as if the ground itself were trying to keep me in place. I pulled the curtain back just a fraction, just enough to peer outside. The street was empty. There was nothing there, just the faint glow of the streetlight and the darkened houses beyond. Then, something moved. It was a shadow darting quickly across the street, too fast for my eyes to fully catch. I flinched and pulled back from the window, but the sound continued, echoing through the room. Tap, tappy tap. I couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else, but the rhythm was too deliberate, too insistent to ignore. My mind raced, my body frozen in place. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The phone buzzed again, shattering the silence. Another photo. This one was different. It was taken from inside my house, from my own living room, as if someone had been standing there, watching me. I could see the reflection of my own face in the glass of the window, wide-eyed and full of fear. But standing just behind me in the reflection was the same shadowy figure, their face obscure, but the outline unmistakable. I felt my breath catch in my throat. They were inside. They had been inside. A loud bang at the door snapped me out of my shock. I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest, and spun around to face the sound. The door was still locked, but someone was out there. I couldn't just wait here any longer. I had to leave. I bolted for the back door again, my hands shaking as I grabbed the handle. This time, it turned easily, and the door creaked open to reveal the pitch-black backyard. I didn't hesitate. I stepped outside, my feet hitting the cool grass, and I ran. The chill of the night air cut through me like a knife. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My breath came in ragged gasps as I made my way down the narrow path to the side gate. I knew the street was just beyond, and if I could get to the corner, I would be safe. I could find someone, anyone, to help me. But then I heard it, a soft shuffle behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone was following me. My heart stopped, and I turned to look. There was no one there, just the darkness. The same oppressive silence that had haunted the house. I turned back to the gate, my pulse racing, and reached for the latch. But before I could open it, the footsteps stopped. I froze. I didn't dare move, not even to breathe. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't respond. The figure had to be close now. I could feel their presence, pressing down on me like a weight. Then, from behind me, a voice, a low whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "You can't leave." I spun around, but there was no one there. Nothing but the shadows. The words echoed in my mind, the chill in my bones growing stronger with each passing second. I reached for the latch again, my hands trembling, and finally pulled it open. The gate swung wide. I ran. I didn't look back. The final message. I don't know how long I ran. My legs were aching, my lungs burning, but I couldn't stop. I had to get away. It wasn't until I reached the end of the street that I dared to glance behind me. The house was there, silent in the distance, the front light still on, the window staring out into the night. But there was something else. A figure stood at the window, watching. I turned my back on it, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't look back anymore. I had to leave. I had to get far away. I didn't know who the figure was or how they had gotten into my house. But I knew one thing for certain now. They were still there, waiting. The next morning, as I sat in the safety of a coffee shop, trying to collect my thoughts, I received one final message. A single photo. It was a picture of my reflection in the window of the coffee shop. And in the reflection, standing just behind me, was the figure, smiling. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to move on, to shake off the sense of being hunted. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching me. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. The sound of my own footsteps seemed louder in the silence. Even when I went to work, sat in coffee shops, or walked down the street, I couldn't shake the lingering presence of something or someone close by. I thought about calling the police, but what can I say? How could I explain a series of strange photos, a mysterious figure watching me from the shadows? There was no tangible evidence, no clear threat, just a growing sense of paranoia that gnawed at my insides. But then it happened again. I was sitting in my apartment one evening, the dull hum of traffic outside mingling with the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I had just settled down to watch some TV, trying to distract myself from the chaos in my head. I hadn't received any new photos for a couple of days, and I had allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was over. I was wrong. My phone buzzed, and my heart nearly stopped. A message. It was from the same number, one I had never recognized. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. There it was again, another photo. This time, the photo was taken from inside my apartment, the same living room where I sat just moments ago. The angle was odd, almost as if the camera had been placed on the floor, looking up at me. The soft glow of the TV illuminated my face. But the thing that made my stomach churn was the figure standing in the background, just barely visible. It was blurred, distorted, but the outline was unmistakable. The figure had been standing there while I was watching TV, right behind me. My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I glanced around the room, my heart racing, the walls closing in on me. Had they been there the entire time? The figure, hidden in the shadows, was now closer than ever before. I could feel it, like a weight pressing on my chest. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. I had to get out. I had to leave. I had no idea how they had gotten into my apartment, but I couldn't stay there another second. I couldn't breathe. I grabbed my jacket and rushed for the door. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps, and the sound of my heartbeat echoed in my ears as I fumbled with the lock. The door opened with a click, and I rushed outside, feeling the cool air rush over me like a wave. I didn't stop to think. I just ran. I ran through the city streets, my legs burning, my thoughts scattered. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away, to put distance between myself and the figure that was always just one step behind me. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. No matter how far I ran, no matter where I went, the presence of the figure lingered like a shadow that wouldn't fade. I could almost feel them, close behind me, just out of sight. I found myself at the edge of the city, in a quiet park that I used to visit as a child. The trees whispered in the wind, their branches swaying gently, and the faint light from the street lamps cast long shadows across the path. It was peaceful here, but the peace felt unnatural. It was too quiet, too still, like the calm before a storm. I sat on a bench, trying to collect my thoughts, but the fear continued to bubble up inside me. an insidious presence that never seemed to leave. The phone in my pocket buzzed again, and I didn't want to look, but I had no choice. I pulled it out, and once again, the message appeared. Another photo. I hesitated for only a moment before opening it. I had to know. This photo was different from the others. It was taken from a higher vantage point, looking down at me. I was sitting on the very bench I was on now. The streetlights bathed the park in a cold, yellowish glow, but the Figurath figure was standing in the shadows, barely visible but unmistakable. They were watching me from a distance, hidden in the trees, waiting. I dropped the phone to the bench in shock, my breath coming in quick, panic bursts. The figure had been following me the whole time. They knew where I was, knew where I had gone, and now, it seemed, they were waiting for me to make the next move. I stood up abruptly, my legs trembling, and turned to leave. But just as I started walking, I heard it, a soft rustle in the bushes, a faint whisper in the air, like a breath held too long. "I see you." The words echoed through the quiet park, a chilling whisper that sent a wave of terror rushing through me. I stopped dead in my tracks, my mind racing. Who was it? What did they want? And why had they been following me all this time? I spun around, but the park was empty. The shadows cast by the trees were still, motionless. No one was there. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement, a figure darting between the trees. Just a flash of dark clothing before they disappeared into the night. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, like it was closing in on me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My legs carried me forward, faster, until I was running once again, not looking back, not daring to slow down. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, until my body gave out and I collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for air. But even as I tried to catch my breath, even as I told myself I was safe, I knew it wasn't over. The figure was still out there. They were always going to be out there, watching, waiting. I don't know how long I stayed on the sidewalk, my chest heaving, heart pounding in my ears. The world around me was a blur of streetlights and shadows, the soft hum of the city barely breaking through the noise in my head. My phone was still lying on the ground, untouched, but I couldn't bring myself to pick it up. I didn't want to see another photo, didn't want to know what was happening anymore. My mind raced, spinning in circles, but it always came back to one thing: the figure. They were still out there. They were watching me, following me, and no matter where I went, I couldn't escape them. I glanced around, but the street was empty. No one was walking by, no cars driving past. It was just me, alone in the dim light, with the overwhelming sense that someone, was closeted close. Every passing moment felt like the calm before a storm. The air was thick with the silence, the kind of silence that makes you feel like something's about to happen. I couldn't trust the quiet anymore. Finally, I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling as I unlocked it. I was afraid of what I might find, but I couldn't leave the mystery unresolved. The image of me sitting on the park bench, the figure lurking in the shadows, flashed in front of my eyes. It was haunting, knowing they were watching me, that they had been so close all along. The hairs on my neck prickled as I scrolled through the messages, feeling a sickening dread rise in my throat. But there was one new message, one new photo. I clicked it, my heart hammering in my chest. This photo wasn't like the others. This one was taken from the inside of my apartment. The angle was strange, almost like it was taken from above. The photo showed the living room, MY couch, and the soft, warm light of the lamp illuminating the space. But what struck me wasn't the room or the furniture, it was the reflection. In the reflection of the glass, I could see myself sitting on the couch, but standing behind me was the figure, their face still obscured in shadow. I could see their outline, their form just behind the couch, tall and imposing. but their face sight wasn't hidden anymore. In the reflection, I could see their eyes, and they were staring directly at me. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, suffocating. I felt trapped, paralyzed, unable to move as the figure's gaze seemed to bore into my soul. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, my mind whirling in confusion and terror. How had they gotten into my apartment? How long had they been there, watching me? I dropped the phone in shock, my body shaking uncontrollably. My mind raced as I thought about all the places I had been, the rooms I had visited, the moments I had spent all of them, possibly watched. I glanced toward the apartment door, my feet frozen in place. The lock. I had locked the door when I left. I was sure of it. But now, I wasn't so certain, and I locked it. Suddenly, a noise cut through the silence, the softest sound, like a creak. I spun around, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The apartment was eerily still, the shadows stretching long and thin across the walls. But that sound, it was coming from the hallway. I stepped forward, my pulse thundering in my ears. Each step felt like it took an eternity. The floorboards creaking under my weight. I reached the hallway, but there was nothing. The air was cold, unnaturally cold, and the silence was suffocating. Then I heard it again, a soft scrape, then another. It was coming from the closet, the one I had left shut, the one I had checked earlier. My feet moved before I could think, and I rushed to the closet door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. I opened it. Empty. Nothing. Just the usual clutter of coats and old boxes. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm my racing heart. But as I turned to walk away, I saw it. There, on the floor, in the corner of the closet, was something out of place. A small, folded note. I bent down and picked it up, my hand trembling as I unfolded the paper. The writing was messy, almost frantic, as if the words were being scribbled in a rush. "You can't run from me." The ink was still fresh, as if the note had been written moments ago, and yet I couldn't remember seeing it there before. I backed away from the closet, my body flooded with fear. How could this be happening? How was it possible that someone had been in my apartment without me noticing? How long had they been here? The thought made my stomach turn. My mind was racing. But nothing made sense anymore. The photos, the figure, the notes of it felt like some kind of nightmare I couldn't escape. I turned and walked toward the window, the only place in the apartment that offered some kind of view. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside. But the street below was empty. There was no one there. But then, something caught my eye. A flash of movement across the street. I strained my eyes, and there it was, a figure standing in the shadows, just beyond the streetlight's glow. I couldn't make out the details, but I knew it was them. The same figure, the same presence. They were still watching, and then the phone buzzed again. I picked it up, my heart sinking. Another message, another photo. This time, it was a picture of my reflection in the window, but this time, I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the reflection, the figure was standing directly behind me. Their face was clear now. I could see every detail of hollow eyes, the twisted grin, the cold, empty expression that made my blood run cold. They were right behind me. I turned around, but the apartment was empty. No one was there. I bolted for the door, my mind racing. The world around me felt like it was spinning, warping, and the sense of dread clung to me like a heavy fog. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get out. Anywhere. I threw open the door and ran into the hallway. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was the figure, and this time, they were smiling. I stood frozen at the end of the hallway, my feet unwilling to move as the figure stood at the far end, just a few feet away. The dim lighting of the hallway cast long shadows, but I could make out their features now too clearly. Their face was pale, hollow, and their eyes toes eyes were dark voids, like there was nothing behind them. But somehow, I could still feel them watching me. It wasn't just the gazette, was the knowing. They weren't just a shadow, they were real. A chill ran down my spine, and for a moment, the air around me seemed to thicken, suffocating, pressing in from every direction. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. "You shouldn't have run," the figure whispered, its voice like gravel scraping against stone. The words were soft, but they pierced the silence like a blade. "I've been waiting for you." I didn't know how to respond. My heart pounded in my chest, and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears, drowning out everything else. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, but nothing made sense. How had they gotten in? Why had they been following me? I backed up slowly, instinctively, my legs trembling beneath me. But the figure didn't move. They didn't have to. Their presence alone was enough to make me feel like I was suffocating, like the walls were closing in. "You know," the figure said, stepping closer, their voice growing quieter. "I've been watching you for a long time. Every moment you've spent running, I've been right there, just out of sight, always just behind you, waiting for you to turn around." My breath hitched in my throat, my chest tight. The terror I felt wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was a deeper kind of dread, the kind that comes from knowing that something has been following you, unseen. Every step of the way, I turned to run again, but my legs felt like lead, like I couldn't move fast enough. I had to get out of here. I had to get as far away from them as possible. But the figure was already closer. "It's too late to run now," they said, their voice so calm, so eerily steady. "I've been waiting for you to make a mistake. You were always going to run. You always knew deep down that I was there." I whirled around, panic clawing at my chest, and there they were, standing just a few feet away, as if they had always been there, as if they had been waiting for me to turn and face them. The coldness in their eyes sent a shock through my veins. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My mouth was dry, and my chest felt like it was caving in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I staggered back, desperate to get away. But there was nowhere to go. The hallway seemed endless now, the walls pressing in around me like a vice, each step feeling heavier than the last. The figure, however, remained the same, motionless, silent, but always closer. It was as if they were always just an inch away, always on the edge of my perception. And then, in an instant, they were right in front of me. "Don't worry," the figure whispered, their breath cold against my skin. "You'll see me again soon. I'll always be here, just like I've always been." I wanted to push them away, to scream, to fight, but my body wouldn't obey. I felt paralyzed, trapped in the moment, caught in their gaze. But then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The figure vanished. The hallway fell silent. The air felt lighter, as though the weight of the presence had been lifted. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there, lurking just beyond my reach. I was being watched. Always. I sank to my knees, gasping for breath, my head spinning. The fear, the terror, still gripped me, and I couldn't stop shaking. I had to get out of the apartment. I had to leave. But the thought of stepping into the world again, knowing they were still out there, terrified me even more. I crawled toward the door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. But just as I was about to open it, a sudden noise from the other side of the door stopped me cold. A soft, deliberate knock. Tappy tappy tap. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The knock was gentle, almost casual, but it sent a wave of ice through my veins. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I had to leave. I had to get out of this apartment, away from the figure, away from the nightmare. But I couldn't open the door. Not now. Not like this. The knock came again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. I slowly stood up, backing away from the door. My legs weak, my mind reeling. I felt trapped, cornered, like there was no escape. I glanced toward the window. It was open. A gust of wind blew through the window, rustling the curtains. But it wasn't the wind that made my blood run cold. It was the fact that the figure was now standing outside, looking in through the glass, their face pressed against it like a grotesque reflection of the nightmare that had been following me. They were there, right outside, watching. I felt my knees buckle, and I collapsed to the floor. Tears blurred my vision as I gasped for air. I couldn't understand how this was happening, how this nightmare had become my reality. Who were they? Why were they doing this? The phone buzzed again. I couldn't bring myself to pick it up, but I knew what it was. Another photo, another image of the figure standing outside, watching me. The same twisted grin, the same hollow eyes. I turned away from the window, covering my face with my hands. I couldn't look anymore. I couldn't stand it. But the worst part was knowing that no matter what I did, no matter where I went, I couldn't escape them. They would always find me. Always. The phone buzzed again, and then I heard a voice, soft, cold, and almost mocking. "You can't run from me. You never could." I couldn't escape it. The fear, the dread, it was all consuming, wrapping around me like a heavy fog. My legs felt weak, my breath shallow, as I clung to the cold floor of my apartment. The phone in my hand buzzed again, sending a jolt of panic through me. But I couldn't bring myself to look at it. I didn't want to see what new horror the figure had left for me. I knew it would only make things worse. But there was something deep inside me, small, terrified whisper that told me I had no choice. I had to know. I had to face it. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone and unlocked it. Another message from the same number. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the text. This time, there was no photo. There were only words, simple, chilling words that froze me to the core. "You can't escape. I'm always here, watching, waiting. You're never alone." My heart raced. "Always here, waiting." The words echoed in my mind, repeating over and over again, growing louder with every passing second. I could feel my body trembling, my hands slick with sweat. They were always here. A sharp sound broke through the fog of my thoughts and knocked at the door. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. This time, the knocking wasn't from outside my apartment. It was coming from inside. The sound was soft at first, tentative, almost as if someone was testing the door. Tap, tap, tap. Then it grew louder, more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't a mistake. Someone or something was knocking at my door. The sound was unmistakable. But the strangest part, I hadn't heard anyone come in. There had been no one else here since the figure had disappeared. I was alone, or at least, I had thought I was. I stood motionless, my heart thudding in my chest. My body refused to move, even though every instinct told me to run. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave the apartment, not with the figure outside, not with the terror crawling under my skin, squeezing tighter with each second. The knock came again, louder, more urgent. Tap, tap, tap. I took a step forward, almost against my will. The hallway stretched out before me like an endless tunnel, the door at the end seeming like a distant, unreachable destination. I could feel my legs shaking as I approached it, but I couldn't turn back. I couldn't keep hiding. I had to know. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling so badly I almost couldn't grasp it. My breath caught in my throat as I twisted the handle. The door opened slowly, creaking on its hinges. I looked into the hallway, my eyes scanning the empty space. The silence was almost deafening. No one was there. I stepped cautiously into the hallway, my eyes darting around the dimly lit space. The door across from mine was slightly ajar. My pulse quickened as I took a step forward. I couldn't see clearly through the crack, but I knew we felt that something was wrong. I was about to step forward when I saw it, a shadow stretching across the floor. A figure, the same figure. I couldn't move. My body froze as I realized they were standing just out of sight, hidden in the doorway. They had been there all along, watching, waiting. But it was the figure's face that truly made my blood run cold. It wasn't the same. It was distorted, as though something had twisted and warped it. Their eyes were wide, unnatural, black as night, and their mouth, it wasn't smiling. It was open, stretched wide, almost grotesque. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, staring into the face of my tormentor. And then, I saw the most horrifying thing of all. The figure's face slowly started to twist, stretching and contorting, until I could see the outline of my own face, my own terrified expression reflected back at me. It was my face, but it wasn't. It was distorted, twisted, mocking. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled backward, my feet tripping over themselves as I tried to escape. But the figuretti were already inside my apartment. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash, the walls vibrating as if the entire building was shaking. I spun around, but there was no one there. The apartment was empty. I was alone again. But then, I felt it, a coldness creeping over my skin, a chill that sank deep into my bones. It was them. I couldn't explain how I knew, but I could feel their presence. They were in the room with me. I backed into the corner of the apartment, my eyes darting around, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. And then I heard the faintest of whispers, too quiet to make out at first. "You can't run, you know." The voice was soft, almost too soft, but it cut through the silence like a knife. "You never could. I'm always here." I looked around, desperate to find the source of the voice, but there was nothing. The apartment was still, silent, empty. But I felt it. I could feel them. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. A shadow. I turned just in time to see the figure standing in the doorway again, their distorted face staring back at me. This time, their mouth stretched wider, impossibly wide, and they smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy, or even of malice. It was a horrifying, twisted grin that seemed to mock me, to remind me that I couldn't escape. Not now. Not ever. They took a step forward, and I felt my body seize up in fear. My limbs didn't obey me. I couldn't run. The figures slowly reached toward me, their hands stretching out, fingers long and unnaturally thin. "It's time to stop running," they whispered. I closed my eyes, bracing for what was to come. But all I could feel was their cold presence, surrounding me, suffocating me. The darkness swallowed me whole. And then, everything went black. The world was silent, completely still. I opened my eyes, but everything was blurred, a thick fog clouding my vision. It wasn't the kind of fog that comes with sleep, no. This was something different. It was the kind of fog that surrounds you when you've been trapped in a nightmare for too long, where everything feels unreal, but at the same time, you know it's as real as the air you breathe. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, like I was stuck in quicksand, unable to break free. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my mind, but the more I tried, the more it consumed me. I was in my apartment, or at least, I thought I was. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. There was a coldness in the air, a presence that made it impossible to ignore. I took a deep breath, pushing myself up, and immediately regretted it. The weight, that feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was so overwhelming that it almost crushed me. I stumbled to my feet, my heart racing, my chest tightening. I looked around, my eyes darting from corner to corner. The apartment was empty, but I could feel them. The figure, Their presence, like a shadow, stretched through the room, wrapping around me, suffocating me. My mind raced. Where were they? What did they want from me? Why couldn't I escape? The air seemed to thicken as I moved across the room, the walls pressing in on me, narrowing with every step I took. Every part of my body screamed at me to get out, to run. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave. They were always going to be there. I reached for the door, but before I could touch the handle, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then, the room plunged into darkness. The silence was now deafening. I couldn't see anything, not even my own hand in front of my face. I froze, my breath shallow, every instinct telling me to stay still, to hold my ground. But something was different. Something had changed. In the darkness, I heard its softest rustle, like the shift of clothing, the scrape of shoes on the floor. The figure was here. They were in the room with me. I turned, trying to orient myself, but I couldn't move. I was trapped. You never learn, do you? The voice came from the darkness, a low, mocking tone that chilled me to the core. It wasn't loud, but it carried through the silence, echoing off the walls like it was everywhere. The voice wasn't familiar, but it felt like it should be. It felt like it had been with me all along. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My throat was dry, my body paralyzed with fear. I couldn't escape. No matter what I did, I couldn't outrun this. The figure had always been here, always watching. I had never been alone. You can't run from me, the figure whispered again, closer this time. You never could. I staggered back, unable to move fast enough. The air felt thick, suffocating, as though the very walls were closing in. They were too close. I could feel their presence. Right behind me, a breath on the back of my neck, the weight of their gaze on my skin. I was trapped, but then, suddenly, the light snapped back on, blinding, and there they were. The figure stood in the center of the room, their form clearer than ever before. They were tall, impossibly tall, their features still twisted and grotesque. But now their face was clear. I could see their eyes now black as voids, like there was nothing inside. Their lips pulled back into a wide, jagged grin. But it wasn't a grin of joy, it was a grin of hunger. I've been waiting for you, the figure said, their voice smooth like velvet, yet laced with something sinister. And now that you've finally seen me, I won't let you go. I wanted to run. I needed to run. But my legs wouldn't move. My body wouldn't obey. I was rooted to the spot, unable to escape, unable to fight. It was as if the figure had taken control of everything, controlling the very air around me. The figure took a step forward, then another, closing the distance between us. I was still paralyzed, unable to react. The dread in my chest was suffocating, and all I could do was watch as they slowly, deliberately approached. You're mine now. The figure's voice was no longer mocking. It was cold, final. The words settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating me, drowning me in the realization that I had no escape. I tried to scream. I tried to shout, to do anything to break free, but nothing came out. My voice was trapped inside, just as I was. I could only watch as the figure loomed over me, their smile wide and stretching impossibly farther. They reached out slowly, their hands so long and pale, their fingers like claws, brushing the air between us. You can't run. You can't hide. I will always find you, they whispered. I am always here. And then, before I could react, their hand shot out, closing around my throat. The coldness of their skin seeped into mine, and I gasped, trying to pull away. But the grip tightened, unrelenting, suffocating. In that moment, I realized that figure wasn't just in my apartment. They were inside me. They had always been inside me. Their voice, their presence, their face sight had been in my mind. Always. I had been running from something I couldn't escape because it was a part of me, a part of my own fear. The last thing I felt was their grip on my throat, the darkness closing in, and the eerie certainty that no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, the figure would always be there, always watching, always waiting. The last thing I felt was the suffocating grip of the figure's hand around my throat, tightening with each passing second, as though they were drawing the life out of me. My vision blurred, and the world around me felt like it was fading. The darkness closed in on the edges of my mind, and for a moment, I thought this was the end. But then, just as the darkness seemed to consume me entirely, the pressure on my throat loosened. My lungs screamed for air as I gasped, coughing violently. I fell to my knees, struggling to breathe. But I wasn't alone anymore. The figure was still there, their presence overwhelming, their form looming just in front of me. I couldn't see their face clearly now, but I didn't need to. I could still feel them, their coldness, their emptiness. They weren't just standing in front of me, they were inside me, in my thoughts, in my very soul. My body shook with terror as I pushed myself back against the wall, trying to create distance, trying to escape the presence that seemed to fill every corner of the room. But there was no escape. The figure didn't move, but their presence was so thick, so suffocating. It felt like the walls themselves were closing in. The apartment seemed to distort, bending and warping around me, like I was losing touch with reality. "You think you can escape?" the figure's voice whispered, so close that it felt like they were speaking directly into my mind. "You think you can run from me, but you're wrong. You'll never be free." I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but my voice failed me. Every word felt like it was stuck, trapped in my throat, just like I was trapped in this nightmare. But then, something inside me snapped. The realization hit me hard, like a cold wave crashing over me. This wasn't just some random stalker. This wasn't some man or woman following me through the streets. This wasn't even something supernatural. It was my fear. It had always been my fear. I had been running from it for so long, trying to avoid it, to bury it under the layers of my life, thinking that if I ignored it, it would go away. But it never did. It always followed, always watching, always waiting, until it became me. I was the one who had created this figure. I had brought them into my life through my own fear, my own anxiety, my inability to face the things that haunted me. The photos, the figure, the messages, they were all manifestations of my own terror, my own guilt, my own darkest thoughts made real. The figure had never been outside me. They had always been a part of me, a part of my mind that I refused to confront. And now, they were here, standing in front of me, more real than ever. I had been running from the truth, running from the very thing I needed to face. And in my fear, I had made it worse. The more I tried to escape, the more the figure grew stronger. I had to stop running. I had to face them. Slowly, my breathing steadied, and I stood up, my body trembling. The figure remained motionless, but I could feel them watching me, waiting for me to make my move. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, and with a trembling voice, I whispered into the silence, "I'm not afraid anymore." At first, nothing happened. The figure stood there, unmoving, their cold presence still weighing down on me. But as I spoke the words, I felt something shift. The air seemed to grow lighter, the oppressive weight lifting just a little. The figure's form wavered, like smoke in the wind, as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. "You cannot get rid of me," the figure hissed, their voice a distorted echo of my own fears. "You can't make me disappear." I took another step forward, my legs shaking beneath me. But I couldn't stop now. I had to face this. I had to confront the thing that had haunted me for so long. "I can," I whispered again, more firmly this time. "I am not afraid of you anymore. You're me. You are my fear, and I am stronger than you. The figure's form flickered again, the edges of it starting to blur, like it was disintegrating in the air. For a moment, I felt the overwhelming urge to turn away, to run, to escape again. But I held firm. I kept my eyes locked on the figure as it wavered in front of me. With every word I spoke, with every step I took toward the figure, it grew weaker. The coldness that had surrounded me began to dissipate, and I felt the weight in my chest begin to lift. The figure's grin faded, the darkness in their eyes retreating. It was fading. You can't escape the truth, the figure muttered, their voice fading into nothingness. You can't run from yourself. And just like that, the figure was gone, vanished. The apartment was silent once again. I stood there, breathing heavily, feeling as if I had just come out of a nightmare that had lasted far too long. The air around me was lighter, the room warmer. The darkness that had clung to every corner had lifted, and I felt free. The photos, the messages, the figure was all gone, for the first time, in what felt like forever. I was alone, but it wasn't an oppressive loneliness. It was a peaceful stillness, the kind that comes after a storm has passed. I looked down at my phone, still on the floor where I had dropped it earlier. My hands were still shaking as I picked it up. There were no new messages, no photos. The screen was clear. I smiled softly to myself. I had faced the truth, and I had won. But just as I was about to put the phone down, I noticed something, a single message. It was from an unknown number. I opened it with trembling fingers, and as the screen lit up, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The photo was of me, standing in my living room. But the chilling part wasn't the photo. It was the message that came with it. I'm still here. The message was there, hanging in front of me like a weight I couldn't lift. I stared at the screen in disbelief. I'm still here. The words lingered, cold and mocking, on the screen. I felt my heart beat faster, a wave of dread crashing over me. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. The figura thing I had faced, the thing I had finally confronted, was gone. I had won. I had broken free. At least, I had thought I had. I stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity. Was this some sort of cruel joke? Could it be someone else, playing with me? Someone who had been watching, somehow in the shadows, taking pleasure in my fear. But no, I knew. Deep down, I knew. This wasn't a joke. It was them. The message was so simple, so small, but it carried the weight of everything I had feared. I had told myself that I was strong, that I had faced my fears and confronted them head on. But now, it felt as though I was back at square one. What if I hadn't truly beaten it? What if this was just the beginning? I glanced around the room, a sudden unease creeping in, a creeping feeling of being watched. The walls felt closer, the air thicker. I wasn't alone. The apartment was too quiet, too still. But where was it coming from? I turned the phone over in my hands, trying to make sense of the message. The photo, the image on the screen was as clear as day. Me, standing in my own living room. But I hadn't taken the photo. I hadn't been aware of anyone in the room. I had been alone. The sound of my breath was deafening in the quiet space. I lifted my eyes from the phone, looking around the room, expecting to see some sort of shadow, some shape that would confirm what my mind was already screaming. The figure was here. Nothing. The room was empty. I shook my head, almost angry at myself for letting fear take hold again. I had to focus. I had to find a way out of this. A way to truly rid myself of this. I couldn't keep spiraling. I couldn't keep running. But the truth was, I didn't know how to escape anymore. I had thought I had faced my fear, had looked it in the eye, understood it, and stood my ground. But now it felt like I was slipping deeper into the nightmare. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look. I was terrified of what it might say. But my hand moved on its own. I opened the new message. You can't escape what you are. The words struck me like a physical blow. What I was. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The phone trembled in my hands. What did that mean? What was I? I looked up again, and this time, I could swear I saw something move just a flicker. A shift in the corner of my vision, as if something was there, just on the edge of perception. I didn't turn immediately. I couldn't. I needed to see it for myself. But then the flicker became more than a flicker. It was a silhouette at first, but then clearer, more defined. The figure. They were standing in the doorway. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The fear that had once been paralyzing now washed over me like a slow tide, drowning out all thought. I couldn't move. I was trapped. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching. And in that moment, I understood something. I had never truly escaped them. The figure wasn't something external. It wasn't just a nightmare or a manifestation of my fear. It was me. It was a part of me that I had tried to ignore, tried to bury. But it had always been there waiting, lurking, feeding off my own terror. I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. The figure didn't need words. It didn't need to say anything. It didn't need to do anything. It was already inside me. And the worst part, I realized it wasn't about escaping anymore. I would never be able to escape. The figure was my fear, my guilt, my deepest thoughts. It had become so entwined with my mind that I could never truly separate myself from it. The photos, the messages, they were just ways for it to remind me that I was never really alone. I felt my legs buckle beneath me, the weight of the realization crushing me. I had been running from myself this entire time. The figure took a slow step forward, its outline becoming clearer, and I could see now, through the darkness that enveloped the room, the smile. That same twisted, cruel smile. But it wasn't a grin of joy. It was a grin of acceptance. A grin that told me it was always going to be this way. I closed my eyes, unable to look any longer. The figure's presence was suffocating. But then, the strangest thing happened. The pressure of coldness, the dread, the suffocating weight of it all began to lift, slowly at first, like a fog dissipating in the morning sun. I opened my eyes, expecting to see the figure standing in front of me. But when I did, there was nothing. The room was still. For a moment, I felt the hope that I had been craving, feeling of relief, of release. But I knew deep down it wouldn't last. It would never last. I glanced at my phone again. Another message had appeared. I'll always be here. And deep down, I knew that this was the truth. The figure would always be with me, because it had always been me. There was no running, no hiding, no escaping. The only thing I could do was face it, accept it, and live with it. It was never about defeating the figure. It was about accepting that it was part of me, that I was the one who had created it, and that there was no freedom from what I had become. The phone buzzed again, snapping me from my thoughts. I'll always be here. Those words reverberated in my mind like a haunting lullaby, comforting yet suffocating. The message was clear. There was no getting rid of this, no running away from it. I closed my eyes for a moment, my hands trembling as I put the phone down on the table. It was never going to end. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that the figure had disappeared, that I had conquered the fear. But as I looked around the apartment, everything felt so wrong. The space felt too quiet, too still, as if the walls were closing in, inch by inch. There was no escape. It was like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stood up slowly, feeling dizzy. My legs were unsteady beneath me. The sense of being watched had never left. The coldness in the air clung to my skin like an invisible fog, and I knew we could feel it was all around me. It was still here. I turned to face the window. The city outside was calm, the streetlights flickering softly in the distance. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that the world outside was just as suffocating. as the room around me. The figure had been with me all this time, and now it felt like they were more than a shadow. It felt as though they had become the very air I breathed. My reflection caught my eye in the window, and for a split second, I froze. I saw myself standing there, just as I always had. But something was wrong. My eyes weren't my eyes. They were the figure's eyes. I turned quickly, my heart racing. But when I looked, the room was empty. My own reflection was just that, mere reflection. But the unease in my chest refused to dissipate. I wasn't alone in here. I was never alone. The phone buzzed again, more persistent this time. I picked it up reluctantly, knowing exactly what I would find, but somehow hoping for a different outcome. A new photo. It was a picture of me standing in my living room. But this time, the angle was different. The figure wasn't in the background. They weren't visible in the way they had been before. But I saw a distortion in the corner of the image, barely noticeable, was something that wasn't there before. A shadow, a hand. The hand wasn't mine. The fingers were long, unnaturally thin, almost skeletal. The nails were sharp, black like the void, and they seemed to be reaching toward me, almost touching me. I felt my stomach churn. I put the phone down again, trying to steady my breathing. This was real. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a game. It wasn't something I could rationalize away. The figure had always been there, and I had only been deluding myself into thinking it had gone away. It wasn't just in my mind. It wasn't just some metaphor. It was real, and it had me in its grip. I knew that now. I had to face it. I didn't know how, or even where to begin. I was lost, caught in a never-ending loop of terror, running from something that was tied to me. It was inside me, as much a part of me as my own breath. I was the one who had created it, and now I had to learn to live with it. I walked over to the door, opening it slowly, peeking out into the hallway. There was no sign of anyone. The building was eerily quiet, and for a moment, I let myself believe I was truly alone. But the silence felt wrong. It wasn't comforting. It was oppressive. The moment stretched on. And then, I heard it, a faint scratching noise. I turned toward the sound, heart racing in my chest. The scratching grew louder, more distinct, coming from the direction of my apartment door. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like claws dragging across wood. Now, I backed away from the door, dread pulling in my stomach. The figure was here, out there, waiting. I couldn't handle it anymore. I couldn't run. I couldn't escape. The door rattled. I jumped back, my hands shaking uncontrollably as the door shook again, this time more violently. Something was on the other side. Someone was trying to get in. I rushed to lock the door, panic rising in my chest as I heard the sound of nails scraping against the wood, clawing at the door as if they were trying to tear it down. I couldn't breathe. The door shuddered with a loud crash, the lock snapping in an instant. The door swung open, and there it was. The figure stood in the doorway, their faces twisted as ever. But this time, they were closer, so much closer. The smile was gone. Instead, their lips were stretched thin, as if they were holding back something. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, as if waiting for something, waiting for me to finally understand. I stepped back, but the figure didn't move. They were waiting. And then, slowly, their hand reached toward me. Their long, bony fingers stretched out, slow but deliberate, as if they were savoring the moment. "You can't run from me," they whispered. I could feel the coldness of their hand as it touched my face, icy and unyielding, a cold that sunk deep into my skin. It was like being frozen from the inside out. It was suffocating. And in that moment, I understood. The figure wasn't just tormenting me. They were me. They were the fear I had never faced, the darkness I had ignored, the parts of myself I had never acknowledged. They were my guilt, my shame, my anger. They were everything I had hidden from myself, and now they were forcing me to confront it all. I wanted to scream, to push them away, to run. But I knew deep down, I knew there was nowhere left to run. I had to face them. I had to face myself. I closed my eyes, the cold of the figure's touch burning through me, and in that moment, I finally spoke the words I had been avoiding. "I'm sorry." The figure's hand froze, and I felt the room hold its breath. Then, slowly, I felt their grip loosen. The cold receded. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. The room felt different now, lighter. It wasn't peaceful, but it wasn't as suffocating. The air seemed clearer. I was no longer trapped in that space of fear, but the figure's final words still lingered in my mind. They had been right. I could never run from myself, and though I might have faced them, I knew now that the fight was far from over. The figure might not be here anymore, but the darkness inside many own fears, regrets, and doubts they would always be with me, and the challenge would always be learning how to live with them, to never let them control me again. The room was still, the air around me clear and heavy with a silence that had descended like a thick curtain. The figure, the manifestation of my fear, had gone, leaving only the residue of their presence hanging in the air. I was no longer suffocated by their cold touch or by the weight of my own terror. But even though they were gone, the feeling of dread didn't fully disappear. I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was lingering, watching me from the shadows. The fear had always been inside me, and now, even though I had faced it, the echoes of it remained. The figure wasn't go night was part of me, woven into the fabric of who I was. A piece of my inner darkness that could never be fully erased. I sat on the floor, my back leaning against the wall, my eyes staring blankly at the floor. I could still hear the faint whispers of their voice in my head, the way they had said, "You can never escape me." It was true. I would never be completely free from my fear. But somehow, the truth felt lighter now, as if, for the first time, I understood that I could live with it, that it didn't have to control me. It was just a part of me, like the shadows in the corners of the room. They would always be there, but they didn't have to consume me. The phone buzzed again, jolting me from my thoughts. I had almost forgotten about it, tucked on the table next to me. It had been silent for a while, but now, the buzz was louder, more insistent. I picked it up slowly, the weight of it in my hands a reminder of everything I had gone through. Another message. I opened it cautiously, my fingers trembling as I swiped to reveal the content. There was no photo this time, no new images of me, standing helpless in my own apartment. Just a simple message. "I'm still here. Always." The words were calm, almost matter-of-fact, but they weren't terrifying anymore. They didn't fill me with that paralyzing sense of dread that I had felt before. I wasn't trapped in fear anymore. I had broken free. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the weight of the figure bearing down on me. It was me. It had always been me. And now, I understood that I couldn't keep running. I couldn't keep avoiding the parts of myself that terrified me. I had to face them, accept them, and move forward. The phone buzzed again, but this time, I didn't open it right away. I let it buzz, let the sound linger in the room, and then, after a long pause, I picked it up. This time, it was just a notification, a social media update, nothing more. It was something so ordinary, so mundane, and it made me realize that I hadn't checked my messages in a while. I hadn't seen the world outside of my fear in what felt like weeks. The weight in my chest lifted, just a little. The feeling that I had been trapped in a nightmare, unable to break free, was beginning to fade. I didn't need to face the figure anymore. I didn't need to confront my fear in such a raw and violent way. What I needed was to accept that fear, acknowledge its existence, and then let it be. I stood up slowly, the ground beneath me feeling solid, stable again. For the first time, in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the need to flee. I didn't feel the constant pressure on my chest. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I wasn't running from myself. But then, as I turned to leave the apartment, a sudden thought struck me. What if it was never about the figure? What if it had been about me all along? I walked to the window, my feet moving automatically, my mind racing with the realization. I opened the blinds and stared out at the city below. The streets were lit up with the golden glow of streetlights, and I saw people walking, laughing, living their lives. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. The fear had been keeping me isolated, making me believe that I was the only one who was suffering, that I was the only one with a darkness inside. But that wasn't true. Everyone had their own fears, their own struggles, and I was no different. I wasn't alone, and I didn't have to be afraid anymore. I walked out of the apartment, leaving the door open behind me. The hallway was still dark, but it no longer felt threatening. It was just a hallway, just a place. I stepped outside into the cool night air, feeling the wind on my skin, the world moving around me. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh, crisp air. I wasn't free from fearing it completely, but I had learned to live with it. I had learned to accept it as part of me, not something to run from, but something to understand. And as I walked through the streets, a strange peace settled in my chest. The figure, the photos, the messages, they were all part of me. But they didn't control me. I controlled me. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could finally breathe again. As I walked through the streets, feeling the cool breeze brush against my skin, the city seemed alive in a way it hadn't before. It was as though the fog that had clouded my mind for so long had finally begun to lift. The world, once terrifying, now appeared clear and full of possibilities, full of things I had ignored in my pursuit of escape. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure, how it had been a reflection of myself, how it had represented the darkness I had refused to face. But now, I understood it. I understood that it wasn't something that could just be eradicated, something that could disappear. Fear, anxiety, doubt, they didn't vanish overnight. They didn't go away just because I acknowledged them. The more I walked, the more I realized that I wasn't the only one carrying fear. Everyone does. They just hide it better than I did. The world, full of strangers, full of people living their own lives, was somehow comforting now. It was like I wasn't so alone anymore. I made my way to a small park I used to visit when I was younger. It was quiet, secluded, with trees arching overhead, their leaves rustling softly in the wind. The park felt like a safe haven, a place I could go to clear my mind. But now, it wasn't just about escaping, it was about finding peace in the world. That I had almost let slip away. I sat down on a bench, the cool metal against my skin grounding me in the present. I had to face myself. The figure wasn't some external force. It wasn't just a stalker or a manifestation of my paranoia, it was my inability to deal with the darkness inside me. But now, I had accepted it. I had to live with it, not fight it. My phone buzzed again. I froze. For a moment, I felt the old, familiar dread creeping back in, clawing at my chest. I didn't want to check it. I didn't want to see another photo, another message that would pull me back into that spiral of fear. But then, I remembered something. I was in control now. Fear no longer had a hold on me. I took a deep breath, reached for the phone, and opened the message. It wasn't a photo this time. It wasn't even a message from the unknown number. The message simply read, "Are you ready to let go?" A chill ran through me. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't another taunt. It was a question, and for the first time, I knew the answer. I had already let go. I had already faced what I needed to face. I put the phone down on the bench beside me. Looking up at the sky, the clouds were parting, the stars beginning to emerge in the night sky, casting their faint light over the world below. I was no longer trapped in darkness. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The figure, my fear, was still there, lurking in the back of my mind. But it wasn't in control anymore. The phone buzzed again, but this time, I didn't feel the need to check it. Instead, I stood up, walking away from the bench, from the phone, and from the weight that had held me captive for so long. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if the figure would ever truly disappear, or if my fear would always follow me in some form. But I was ready to face whatever came next. I was ready to live my life again. As I walked through the park, the quiet of the night surrounding me, I couldn't help but smile. I wasn't afraid. I had faced the darkest part of myself, and I had survived. There was nothing more that could hold me back. The days passed in a haze. The weight that had once clung to me so tightly, like a constant presence in my life, now felt lighter. I went about my daily routines, catching up with old friends, getting back to work, and trying to find some semblance of normalcy. I had faced my darkest fears, and for the most part, I believed I had left them behind. But as time went on, the feeling that something was just out of reach, lurking at the corner of my mind, began to creep back in. The figure was still with me. I could feel it sometimes, a cold breath on the back of my neck, a faint shadow at the edge of my vision. It was like a phantom, something I couldn't shake off. Every now and then, I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see them standing behind me. But nothing happened, at least, nothing physical. It was that gnawing feeling, quiet unease of it had never fully left. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding, drenched in sweat, as though I'd just run a marathon. The dreams, nightmares, really still came, twisted fragments of the figure in different forms, always hiding in the shadows, never fully revealed. I would wake up gasping, my body rigid with fear, only to realize that the figure was gone. But it didn't feel like it. It felt like they were still there, just out of sight. One evening, after a particularly restless night, I decided to go for a walk. I needed fresh air. The house felt too small, the walls closing in. The streets were quiet, and the city around me seemed to hum with a soft, almost comforting energy. I walked for miles, the rhythm of my steps grounding me, forcing me to focus on the here and now. I needed to keep moving, but as the night wore on, I felt the familiar sensation again, the feeling of being watched. It was subtle, a shift in the atmosphere, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. There it was again. I looked around, half expecting to see the figure standing in a nearby alleyway, their twisted smile hiding in the shadows. But there was nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, my steps quickened, the air grew heavier, the weight of the unseen presence growing thicker. I turned down a side street, hoping it would lead me away from the unease that had started to settle over me. But the feeling didn't go away. It followed me, just behind me, just out of reach. I wasn't alone. I looked over my shoulder again, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. But there, at the far end of the street, I saw something, a flash of movement. My heart skipped. It was the figure, or at least, I thought it was. The shape was familiar, dark, distorted, but it was moving too quickly, too erratically. It flickered in and out of my vision, always just out of reach, like a shadow that couldn't quite stay in one place. I stood frozen for a moment, my pulse racing, unsure of whether I should run or face it. My feet were rooted to the ground. I couldn't escape this. I couldn't escape what was following me. Then, the shape stopped moving. For a long moment, we just stared at each other from across the street. The figure didn't move, but I could feel it. It was waiting for me. A shiver ran through me, and I took a step back. My thoughts were a blur. Should I confront it again? Should I try to face it head on? No, not this time. I wasn't going to let it control me. I wasn't going to let fear dictate my life again. I turned, my feet moving before my mind had fully decided what to do. I walked away, slowly at first, then faster, my breath coming in short gasps as I tried to outrun it. The figure wasn't real. It couldn't be real. It was just a manifestation of my fear, my guilt, my own inner darkness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was still there. I turned another corner, out of breath now, but the sound of my footsteps was too loud, too harsh. It couldn't be real, but it was. I felt it. I stopped, my chest heaving. It was there. I closed my eyes for a moment, forcing myself to breathe. It's only me. I took another breath and turned around. The street was empty. The figure was gone, but the unsettling feeling remained. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty street, the shadows stretching long and dark, the quiet of the night enveloping me. Had it ever really left? I stood there, waiting for something, a sign, a movement, anything. But there was nothing, no sound, no movement, just the stillness of the city at night. The only thing left was me. I stood still on the sidewalk, the cool air brushing against my skin, the city lights flickering softly around me. The figure of fear had slipped away, but I could still feel its cold presence in the pit of my stomach. It was a phantom, a shadow in the dark corners of my mind that I couldn't seem to shake. No matter how many steps I took forward, no matter how much I tried to convince myself that I had moved on, the fear was still there. I glanced around, hoping to find some sense of peace, some sign that the world wasn't closing in on me again. The streets were empty now, the bustle of the day replaced by a haunting quiet that seemed to stretch for miles. For a fleeting moment, I thought I might be free, but then it happened. I heard it again, the soft, unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I froze, my heart skipped a beat, and my legs turned to lead. No, not again. I told myself to turn around. I told myself to face whatever it was. It was all in my head, but my feet wouldn't move. My body refused to obey. I couldn't look back. I couldn't let it in again. The figure had haunted me for so long that I thought I could recognize the sound of its footsteps, slow, deliberate, like a predator closing in. But I didn't know for sure. Was it really there? Was I hearing things? The footsteps grew closer. I took a deep breath and forced my legs to move. I couldn't stay frozen in place. I had to act. I had to take control. I turned around quickly, my body tense, bracing for what I might see. The street behind me was empty. No one was there. I stared into the darkness, the faint streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. The quiet was almost deafening, the stillness wrapping around me like a shroud. For a moment, I felt like I might be going mad, hearing things that weren't there. I turned away, my chest tight with a mix of fear and frustration. What was wrong with me? Why couldn't I move on? I glanced at my phone again. Another notification. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a photo. I opened it slowly, feeling the pit in my stomach grow. The photo was blurry at first, the image out of focus. But as it came into view, my heart dropped. It was a photo of me, but not just of me. It was me standing in this very street, right here, at this exact moment. How could it be? I wasn't even looking at my phone. There was no way it could have been taken by someone else. My head spun as I examined the photo. The figure wasn't in the frame, but something was off. There was a shadow just beyond me, stretching out on the ground, thin and elongated, almost like it was reaching toward me. I backed away, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The figure had taken the photo. The figure was still here. I looked up again, but the street was still empty. There was no one there. I felt as if I were being pulled between two worlds, one where I was free, and the one where the figure haunted my every move. I wasn't alone. I hadn't escaped. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push the thought out of my mind. It was all in my head. It had to be. But then, I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they were closer. Much closer. I turned, and there, standing just a few feet away, was the figure. Not hidden in the shadows anymore, but right there, in plain sight, staring at me. The face was still distorted. An eerie grin stretched across their features, their eyes toes black. Endless eyewear locked onto mine. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt weak beneath me, and I staggered back, my heart racing. I wasn't strong enough, I couldn't do it. The figure stepped forward, and with every step they took, I could feel the air around me grow colder. "You can't escape me," they whispered, their voice a chilling echo in the empty street. "You never could." The words, that voice that had the power to freeze me in place. I was trapped again, in the same cycle. Unable to escape, the figure wasn't just haunting me anymore. They were here, in the flesh, real and tangible. They had followed me, and now, there was no escape. But then something inside me snapped. No more running. I wasn't going to be their prisoner anymore. I stood my ground, summoning all the strength I had left. My breath was shaky, but I felt a surge of determination, a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The figure was right in front of me, their presence suffocating. But I wasn't going to let them control me again. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," I said, my voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each word. "I am not your prisoner. You cannot control me. I am done with you." The figure froze for a moment, the grin on their face faltering. The air around us seemed to still, as if the universe itself was waiting for something to happen. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, the figure's smile returned at this time. It wasn't twisted or mocking. It was more like acceptance. "You think you're free," they said, their voice soft, almost kind. "But you will always be mine." And just like that, they were gone. I stood there, heart pounding, hands shaking. But for the first time, in what felt like forever, I felt something else. Relief. I had confronted the figure. I had faced my fear. And now, it was gone. Or at least, I believed it was. I wasn't sure if the figure would ever truly disappear from my mind. But for the first time, I felt like I had regained control. I was no longer running. I was no longer hiding. I looked up at the sky, taking in the stars, the night air, and the quiet of the street around me. I had faced the figure, my fear, and I had survived. And that, I realized, was enough. I stood there in the empty street for a long while. The night stretched out before me like a vast, quiet ocean. The figure, or whatever it was that had haunted me, was gone. I could still feel the remnants of their presence, of lingering chill in the air. The memory of that haunting smile, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. But the freedom was fragile. It was like a door had cracked open, just a sliver, letting light in for the first time in months. The darkness was still there, waiting in the corners of my mind. But it wasn't the suffocating force it had once been. I had faced the figure, and in doing so, I had finally looked at my own darkness, the fear, the guilt, the pain. It was all a part of me. But it didn't have to control me. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the quiet of the night. I could live again. But as I walked back toward home, the sense of unease didn't entirely leave me. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure's last words. Their soft, chilling voice. "You think you're free, but you will always be mine." There was an unsettling truth in those words. Maybe the figure wouldn't haunt me in the same way, but their influence and my own influence on myself would always be there. Would I ever truly escape my fear? I unlocked the door to my apartment and stepped inside. The familiar scent of my living space, the warmth of the room, it felt comforting. But there was a residual weight in the air, like something I couldn't shake. The figure might be gone, but its echoes were everywhere. Could I truly be free of them? I tossed my keys on the counter and walked over to the couch, slumping down with a sigh. I couldn't relax. My mind kept going over everything that had happened, every moment of dread, every glimpse of the figure. I tried to convince myself that it was over. I had faced it. I had won. But then, my phone buzzed again. I froze. I hadn't even realized I was holding it in my hands until the screen lit up, casting a soft glow in the dim room. The message was from an unknown number. For a moment, I didn't know whether I should open it. The fear that had been lingering in my chest started to rise again, tightening, squeezing the breath from me. I didn't want to look, but something compelled me. Something inside me told me to check. I opened the message, my hands trembling. Another photo. I hesitated, staring at the screen. My heart pounded in my chest. Was it real? Could it be real? Or was I just torturing myself again, slipping back into the nightmare I had just escaped? The photo was a blur at first, but as it loaded, I saw it clearly. It was of my apartment, the same one I was sitting in now. But the strangest part was that it wasn't just the interior, it was taken from the corner of the room. A dark shape barely visible in the background. A shadow. I could barely make out what it was. But I knew. It was the figure. It was there. Just out of focus. Just out of reach. The same twisted shape that had followed me all this time. They were still here. A rush of panic surged through me, my pulse spiking as I scanned the room. I turned, expecting to see the figure standing in the corner, waiting. But the room was empty. The figure wasn't there. I let out a shaky breath, the fear gripping me. Was this real? I looked back at the photo, the shadow growing clearer. There, in the dark corner of my living room, was the outline of a figure, a distorted shape, indistinct, but unmistakable. The figure had never left. It was just waiting, watching, hidden in plain sight. I stood up, my legs weak beneath me, feeling the cold sweat forming on my skin. I moved toward the corner of the room where the shadow had been. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe the figure would appear, maybe they wouldn't. But all I found was nothing. The room was empty. I didn't know if I was relieved or terrified. The figure had been there. I had seen it in the photo, seen it in the corner of my own home. But it wasn't real, not in the way I thought it was. It wasn't physical. It had never been. It was my fear. And now I understood. The figure of terror I had been running from, the darkness I had been battling, was me. My own mind had twisted and shaped it into something external, something I could fight. But the truth was, it was a reflection of everything I refused to face. I stared at the empty corner of the room, the weight of the realization crashing down on me. The figure wasn't a phantom. It wasn't a person, a stalker, or some malevolent force. It was a part of me, an embodiment of everything I had ignored, everything I had refused to acknowledge about myself. I had created it, but I wasn't going to let it control me anymore. I turned away from the corner, feeling the weight of the photo in my hands. I wasn't going to let it haunt me again. The figure had no power over me unless I gave it power. And for the first time, I realized that I had the choice to stop running. I had the power to face my fear without being consumed by it. I sat back down on the couch, breathing deeply, feeling the calm wash over me. I wasn't free from fear, not entirely. But I understood it now. I understood that fear wasn't something I could outrun. It wasn't something I could fight or destroy. It was part of me, and that was okay. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath, finally feeling the peace that had eluded me for so long. I had faced the figure. I had faced myself. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I could live with it. I could live with me. The The stillness in my apartment was almost peaceful now. It wasn't the same oppressive silence that had weighed on me in the past, when every corner seemed to whisper with the presence of the figure. Now, the silence was mine. I had reclaimed it. The shadows in the room weren't full of threats anymore. They were just shadows. I looked down at the phone in my hand, still clenched tightly, the glow of the screen lighting up my fingers. The photo from before, the shadowy figure lurking in my living room, still lingered in my mind. But I no longer felt the crushing dread that had once accompanied it. The figure wasn't there. Not physically. It was all in my head. But now that I understood that, I felt more empowered. Fear had always been a part of me thing I had tried to ignore. Something I had pushed away for so long. But facing it had shifted something inside me. It was no longer the monster in the dark, the thing that controlled me. It was just a part of me. And now, it was manageable. But still, I couldn't shake the thought that fear never really disappears. It stays with you, lurking in the background, always just beneath the surface, waiting for an opening. And maybe that was okay. Maybe that was how I was meant to live, acknowledging my fear without letting it take over. I stood up, the weight of everything settling over me as I walked to the window. The city stretched out before me, bathed in the soft light of dusk. The air felt clearer now, fresh and full of possibility. The night was still, and the world outside seemed vast and open. Unlike the confined space I'd been trapped in for so long, I took a deep breath and smiled. This was freedom. I didn't feel like I was being followed anymore. The constant sensation of someone watching me had faded. The figure was gonier, at least. It had transformed into something I could live with. But just as I turned away from the window, my phone buzzed again. The screen lit up, and I saw the familiar number flash across the top. Unknown number. A chill ran through me. No, not now. I hesitated, but the compulsion to check the message was too strong. I couldn't ignore it. I opened the message, bracing myself. There was no photo this time. It was just a simple line of text. "Are you sure?" My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the message, my mind racing. What did that mean? Was it the figure? Was it really gone? Or was this the figure's final attempt to pull me back into the terror? To drag me down into the abyss one last time? The question gnawed at me. Are you sure? Was I sure? Was I sure that I could truly live with this fear? Was I sure that I had really moved past it? That I wasn't just fooling myself? I looked around the room again, my breath shallow. I wasn't sure. But then, as I sat there, a sense of peace began to wash over me. It was okay not to be sure. Fear would always be a part of me. There would always be moments when I would question myself, when I would wonder if I was truly free. But freedom wasn't about eradicating every shadow in my mind. It was about understanding that shadows exist and that they don't define me. I didn't need to be sure. I just needed to be present. I just needed to live. With that thought, I let the phone fall onto the couch next to me, the buzzing of the notification fading into the background. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to engage. The figure, the fear, the fatality were no longer my prison. I stood up again, walking toward the door. I needed to go outside, to feel the world again, to remind myself that there was more to life than the darkness I had lived in for so long. The door clicked shut behind me as I stepped into the hallway. The sound of the city outside filled my earth's soft hum of life going on without me. A reminder that the world was moving, with or without my permission. I stepped out onto the street, the cool night air brushing against my skin. I was free, and no matter what the message had said, no matter how much the fear still lingered in the background, I could keep walking forward. The figure had tried to keep me trapped in my mind, in my own cycle of terror and guilt. But I had stepped out of that cycle. I had faced my fear, and in doing so, I had taken back my life, and that was enough. As I walked through the quiet streets, My mind was calm, the nagging weight of the figure's presence no longer hanging over me. I was no longer haunted by their image, their gaze. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this: I wasn't running anymore. I had faced the darkest parts of myself, and I was still standing. And I would keep standing, one step at a time, for as long as I could. The night air was crisp, and I let it fill my lungs as I walked down the sidewalk. The city stretched out before me, a maze of lights and shadows. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. The weight of the figure, the terror it had caused me, no longer pressed on my chest. I had faced it. I had acknowledged it, accepted it, and now, it wasn't a threat anymore. But even as I moved forward, I could feel the quiet nagging at the back of my mind. Was I truly free? The figure had gone. But could I trust myself to keep moving without looking over my shoulder? The question lingered, but this time, I didn't feel the need to answer. I was walking away, and that was enough. I turned a corner and ended up in a small park, a quiet place where I used to sit and think. I hadn't been here in years. The benches were empty, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I walked toward one of the benches and sat down, allowing the night to wrap around me like a familiar blanket. I wasn't running anymore. For the first time, I understood that fear would always be there, lurking in the background, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. It would never fully disappear, but it didn't control me. I had learned that the hard way. The figure, once so powerful, had lost its hold on me because I had stopped trying to outrun it. I hadn't needed to destroy it. I hadn't needed to rid myself of it. I just had to stop letting it dictate my life. I leaned back, staring up at the sky. The stars were dim, but beautiful, scattered like dust across the vast, endless night. I realized I had been too focused on the shadows before, too consumed by them to notice the beauty around me. I had been so afraid of what was lurking in the dark that I hadn't seen the stars, the quiet beauty of the world I had been living in all along. The fear had kept me trapped in a prison of my own making. But now, I could breathe. I let out a slow breath, feeling the tension in my body begin to loosen. I had faced the worst part of myself, darkest, most terrifying part, and in doing so, I had broken free. Not from fear itself, but from the idea that fear had to control me. I smiled softly, feeling the weight of my journey lighten, even if only for a moment. I had learned to accept my fear, to live alongside it, instead of constantly fighting it. There was no magic trick to make it vanish. There was no way to undo the past. But I didn't need to. I just had to keep walking forward. And as I sat there in the park, I began to feel something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time: hope. But even as the peace settled over me, my phone buzzed again. The notification broke the moment of calm, and I instinctively grabbed my phone. I saw the same unknown number flash on the screen. A photo. My heart skipped. What was it this time? I opened the message with a deep breath, prepared for anything. It was a photo of the park where I was sitting, taken from a distance. The figure wasn't in it, but I could see something else in the background. A shadow, faint, far away, but undeniably there. It was watching me. I froze, the weight of the photo sinking in. The figurative fear wasn't completely gone. It never would be. But this was different. The figure had always been something external, something that controlled me. Now, it was simply a reminder, a shadow in the distance, but no longer an immediate threat. I looked at the photo for a long time, trying to understand, and then, finally, I closed my eyes. The truth settling in. I didn't have to run from this anymore. I didn't have to make the shadow disappear, because now, I knew how to live with it, and that was enough. I placed the phone in my pocket and stood up from the bench. The figure, the fear, the photo said would always be a part of me. But I was done letting it control my life. I had finally learned to accept it, to move forward with it, not against it. With one last glance at the park around me, I took a deep breath and started walking again. This time with a newfound sense of peace. The night was still, the city breathing around me, and for the first time in a long time, I knew that I was truly free. Not from fear, but from the need to escape it. The figure had always been a shadow, lurking just out of sight. A piece of me that I had refused to confront. The photo that appeared on my phone, the faint outline of a shape in the background, made it clear that the fear would always be there. But it didn't control me anymore. I walked through the streets, my mind racing with the realization that I had learned to live with my fear. But was that enough? Was it enough to simply live with it? Or was I still hiding in the shadows? Could I really move forward without confronting it once more? The photo haunted me. The shadow, barely visible, still loomed over me, reminding me that no matter how much I had grown, no matter how much I had changed, I could never fully escape it. I stopped at a corner, the night air cool against my skin, and stared at the phone in my hand. I hadn't checked the photo again since I had pocketed it, but I knew it was still there, still waiting, like a silent sentinel that would never leave. The message that accompanied it, "Are you sure?" still echoed in my mind. Am I sure? Sure of what? Sure that I had faced the fear, sure that I had truly let it go. I didn't have the answers. I turned the phone over in my hands and, almost against my will, opened the photo again. The same shadow was there, just behind me, not quite visible, but undeniable. And I wondered, what did it want from me? For a long time, I thought that the fear had been the enemy. I thought that by facing it, I would be free. But the truth was, the fear was never the enemy. It was a part of me. I was just learning how to live with it. But was I ready to face it again? To look directly into the dark corners of my mind and say, I accept you, and you don't control me anymore? I didn't know. The question lingered like smoke in the back of my mind, swirling with confusion and doubt. Was I truly free? The streetlights flickered as I walked deeper into the night, the shadows stretching long and thin in front of me. It felt as though the entire world was watching, or maybe it was just me watching myself. I stopped walking and leaned against a wall, my mind still racing. Was I sure? Was I ready to face it again? Or had I been lying to myself this entire time? I had to find out. I turned back toward the park. The quiet had settled back in, but there was a strange energy in the air, like the calm before the storm. My feet carried me there on their own, each step carrying me deeper into the darkness. I had to know. As I stepped into the park, the feeling of being watched returned, more intense now. The air was thick with it, like the world had stopped breathing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. But as I walked deeper into the park, the tension in my chest started to ease. It was like I was walking into my own mind, my own fears. The park, dark and quiet, felt familiar. It felt safe. I sat down on a bench, the cool metal beneath me grounding me. My phone buzzed again. A message. I'm still here. I glanced at the screen, my heart pounding. The words were simple, but they cut through me like a knife. The figure wasn't gone. It hadn't left. It was still with me, lurking in the corners of my mind, always just out of sight. The shadow in the background of my life, never fully gone, always waiting. But now, I understood. The fear had never been about the figure. It had never been about something external. It had been about me, about my own doubts, my own insecurities. The figure was the reflection of everything I was running from, everything I hadn't wanted to face. I looked up at the night sky, feeling the cool breeze against my skin, the weight of everything that had happened pressing on me. It wasn't over. The fear wasn't gone. But now, I could live with it. I didn't need to hide from it. I didn't need to escape. I could live with it. For the first time, I understood that freedom wasn't about eliminating fear. It wasn't about making it disappear. It was about accepting it. And so, I sat there in the park, feeling the presence of the figure behind me, knowing that they would always be there, but also knowing that I no longer had to be afraid. I didn't need to fight it. I didn't need to run. I just had to live. And in that moment, the shadow didn't seem so terrifying. It was simply there. And I was here. And that was enough. The night stretched on in a quiet stillness, the park surrounding me seeming almost alive with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of the city. I sat there on the bench, feeling as though time had slowed, each passing second pulling me deeper into myself. I had faced the fear. I had come to terms with it. But now, I realized the real challenge was learning to live with it without letting it define me. The figure, the shadow, still lingered in the edges of my mind. But this time, instead of feeling consumed by it, I could sense the pull of something else. Acceptance. The fear was no longer an adversary I had to fight or defeat. It was part of me, and that was okay. I stood up, stretching my arms above my head as I felt the first stirrings of morning air begin to cool the night. The park was empty, but there was a feeling of renewal in the air. I had learned a lot in these past weeks about myself, about my fears, and about how much control I actually had over my own life. The figure that had once haunted me, the darkness that I couldn't escape, was just a shadow now. I turned back toward the path that led home, but before I could take a step, my phone buzzed again. A message. "Are you really free?" The words sent a cold jolt through me. The shadow of the figure had returned in this simple question, still there, lurking in the spaces where I thought I had left it behind. For a moment, I stood frozen in place, the doubt creeping back in. Was I free? I had accepted the fear, but had I really faced it? Was there still something in me that I hadn't acknowledged? I opened the message, the photo appearing on the screen. It was of me. I blinked, feeling my breath catch. How could that be? I had just left the park. I hadn't taken any photos, but there it was, standing in the same park, the same bench. The photo was taken from a distance, and the shadow of the figure, barely visible, was stretched long across the grass behind me. My stomach tightened. The figure wasn't gone. It had followed me. The message below the photo was simple, but it cut through me like a knife. "You're never really free." I stared at the photo, feeling my heart hammering in my chest. The same familiar dread started to creep back in, the feeling that I wasn't in control, that this fear, this figure, was going to consume me again. But then, something shifted. I didn't feel trapped. The figure had no power over me anymore. I had already faced it, understood it, and accepted that it would always be with me. And now, it was just a reminder, a shadow that I didn't need to fear, but one that would always be a part of my life. I wasn't running anymore. I looked around the park, taking a deep breath, feeling the peace settle back into my chest. I didn't need to fight. I didn't need to prove anything. The fear would always be there, lurking in the background, but it didn't control me. I was the one who controlled how I lived with it. The figure could no longer manipulate my every move. I was in charge, and that was the power I had gained in facing it. I closed my eyes for a moment, just standing there in the cool night air, letting the feeling of acceptance wash over me. I was free, not from the fear, not from the figure, but from the need to escape it. I wasn't running anymore. I was living. I turned and walked down the path, my footsteps steady and sure. The city loomed ahead, its lights twinkling in the distance. I knew there would still be moments when the shadow of the figure would creep into my thoughts. There would be days when the fear would return. But I didn't need to be afraid anymore. I could face it. I had faced it. And in that, I had found my strength. The figure might always be there, but I would keep walking, one step at a time, knowing that I was in control of my journey. The days passed in a gentle, quiet rhythm. Life began to feel normal again, perhaps more normal than it had in a long time. The weight that had once pressed so heavily on my chest seemed to lift. I was going through the motions of life again, unburdened by the constant fear that had stalked me. But even though I had made peace with the figure, it still lingered at the edges of my thoughts, just below the surface, like a shadow waiting for the right moment to emerge. It wasn't a constant wait anymore, but it was there quietly reminding me that the fear I had battled so long was still part of me, and that was okay. I went back to work, met friends, and began to enjoy the little things I had once taken for granted. But deep down, I knew that the figure of fear would always be a part of my life. It wasn't something I could eliminate. It was a part of my story, just like all the other experiences that had shaped me. One evening, after a long day, I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the city lights. It was peaceful, almost serene, until my phone buzzed. I froze, the familiar feeling of dread stirring in my stomach. My heart skipped a beat. It was a message. I shouldn't open it. I told myself this, but I knew I would. After everything, after accepting that I couldn't outrun my fear, the reality was that I still felt that pull. It was still there, waiting. I unlocked the phone, my fingers trembling. The message was simple, just a few words, but they hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for. You haven't escaped. I'm still here. My breath caught in my throat. The figure, it was back, but this time, it wasn't a photo. It wasn't the shadow in the corner of the park. It was just a massage words, a statement. It wasn't the physical manifestation I had been running from before. It was just a thought. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. The words were stark, final, but I didn't feel the same terror I once had. My mind didn't race in panic. The dread didn't overwhelm me. I knew the figure in me fear was still there, and I was okay with it. But something shifted in me. This time, it wasn't about running. It wasn't about confronting the figure in the shadows or trying to force it out of my life. It was about recognizing that the figure could be there, but it didn't control me. I sat back in the chair, the message in front of me, and realized something. I was finally living my life. The figure had no control over me anymore. It didn't define me. I was defining myself. And just as I thought about the next step in my journey, how I could truly move forward, he received another message. I didn't need to open it to know it was from the same number. Will you continue living even though I'm still here? I smiled. The figure was still part of me, but it didn't own me. I picked up my phone, locked it, and placed it down on the table. I didn't need to open the message. I already knew the answer. Yes, I would continue living. The fear would always be there, just like the shadows in the corners of the room. But they no longer had power over me. The figure of fear was just a part of the landscape of my mind, and it was okay. I stood up, walking to the window and looking out over the city. I saw the lights shining below, the steady hum of life moving forward. There was no fear in the world around me. The streets were busy, full of people, full of life, and I knew that I could walk among them without fear. I wasn't running anymore. I was living, and that was enough. The days moved forward, each one blending into the next. Life seemed to return to a sort of normalcy. I went through the motions of my routine, attending work meetings, meeting friends, and going about my daily responsibilities. But underneath it all, there was still a quiet hum in the background figure, the fear, the shadow, a constant reminder that no matter how much progress I made, a part of me would always be carrying the weight. But this time, the weight didn't feel as heavy. I had learned to carry it without letting it define me. It wasn't the suffocating burden it once was. It was just a part of me, like an old friend I didn't always acknowledge, but still existed in my thoughts. I sat at my desk one evening, trying to focus on the report in front of me. The soft tapping of keys, the hum of the office air conditioning, it all felt distant, almost muffled. My mind kept wandering, slipping into old patterns of thought. The figure, the shadow, it was still there, wasn't it? Somewhere in the back of my mind, lurking just beyond my awareness. Sometimes, when I close my eyes for too long or let my thoughts drift too far, I can almost see it again, distorted and waiting. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready to face it when it came. The phone on my desk buzzed, snapping me back to the present. I glanced at the screen. An unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, feeling a flicker of that old, familiar sensation of dread. The need to ignore it, to push it aside. I didn't need to see another message. Not now. But I knew I had to face it. I had to stop running from the reminders, the triggers. That still came. I picked up the phone, my hand steady as I unlocked the screen. A photo. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I stared at the image before me. It was a picture of my own reflection in a window. But something was off. There was another figure, this one standing behind me, blurry, distorted in the reflection just like the ones in the past. I blinked, unable to shake the gnawing feeling that something had shifted. The figure wasn't in the room with me. It was in my reflection, almost as if it were mirroring me, mimicking my every move. The fear rose again. It wasn't the figure itself that caused the fear this time, but the realization that the figure and I were somehow connected. The shadow had always been a reflection of my inner darkness, but now, seeing it in the reflection, it felt as though it had merged with me. It wasn't something outside of myself anymore. It was inside me, just like my doubts, my regrets, my fears. The photo, though unsettling, felt different. It didn't control me anymore. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. The figure was still a part of me, but that was okay. I was okay with it now. I set the phone down, pushed the photo to the back of my mind, and returned to my work. The fear was there, but it wasn't overpowering. It wasn't the enemy anymore. It was just a part of the landscape of my mind, and I could keep moving forward despite it. The days passed, and the photo wasn't the only message. I started to receive more, but each one felt less like a threat and more like a reminder. The figure in me fear wasn't something I could banish. It wasn't something that would ever truly go away, but I could live with it. One afternoon, while walking home from work, I passed a small cafe I used to frequent. I hadn't been in there in months, but today, something pulled me in. I stood outside for a moment, looking at the dimly lit interior, the small tables and soft chatter of people. I hadn't felt the urge to go inside in so long, but today, I did. I stepped through the door, the bell above it jingling softly. The smell of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air. It was warm, inviting, the kind of place that had once felt like a safe haven. I ordered my coffee and found a quiet corner by the window, settling in with a book I had left unfinished for months. I felt strangely peaceful here, like a small part of me had finally found its way back. And then, just as I was beginning to relax, the phone buzzed again. I felt my pulse quicken before I even looked at it. The message was simple, a photo again. It was me, sitting at the cafe, just as I was, the photo taken from across the room. But there was something else in the photo this time. A shadow. It wasn't the figure, but it was still a shadow, and it was standing right next to me. The fear didn't seize me the way it had in the past, but it was there, and for the first time in months, I realized something. The figure, the shadow, had always been there. It had never truly gone away. I could try to escape it. I could try to ignore it, but it would always find a way back into my life. But now, I wasn't running. I closed my eyes, a small smile creeping onto my face. I was done running. I had already faced it. The figure wasn't my enemy. It was just part of the journey, part of the story. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. And when I opened my eyes again, the shadow in the photo was gone. The world had changed. I had changed. The days that followed were quieter. The photos, the messages, the haunting presence of the figurati had all but stopped. It was as though the very act of accepting the fear had diminished its power, had stripped it of its ability to control me. And yet, there were still moments, fleeting moments, when I would catch myself looking over my shoulder or checking my phone one last time, wondering if the figure would return. But it never did, not in the same way. The fear had evolved, just as I had. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it no longer had the suffocating grip it once did. I returned to the park again, the place where I had first truly faced my fear. It was quiet now, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling like whispers in the wind. I found the same bench where I had sat before, the same place where everything had changed. I sat down, feeling the cool evening air brush against my skin, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I had learned something important on this journey. Freedom doesn't come from running away from fear, but from living with it. It wasn't about erasing the fear or banishing it forever. It was about accepting it, allowing it to exist without letting it control me. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I felt the familiar sense of being watched. I had expected it, but now, instead of fear, it was just a quiet acknowledgement. The figura's shadow was there, in my mind, but it didn't dominate me anymore. It was just a reminder of everything I had overcome. For the first time, I smiled. I didn't need to run anymore. I was free. The next morning, I walked through the streets of the city with a new sense of clarity. The fears that once gripped me, those dark shadows that had seemed so powerful, no longer had the ability to derail me. I had faced them, understood them, and learned how to exist with them. The photos, the figure, the messages, they had all been tools in my journey, guiding me toward the understanding that fear is a part of life, but it doesn't define who I am. As I walked past the familiar streets, the sounds of life around me filled me with a quiet sense of peace. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I had learned that I didn't need to be afraid of the shadows, the things lurking in the dark corners of my mind. The real strength came from embracing them, seeing them for what they were, and continuing to walk forward in spite of them. I took out my phone for the first time in days, just to check. There were no new messages, no photos. For a moment, I wondered if it was all over, if the figure had truly disappeared. But then I realized I didn't need an answer. The figure had been a part of me, reflection of my fears. But now, it wasn't about seeking closure. It was about continuing the journey. I smiled again, a small, contented smile, and continued walking, knowing that life would always present challenges. But now, I was ready to face them, ready to keep walking. I had nothing to fear anymore.